Are you in excruciating pain brought on by your son, daughter, or spouse suffering from addiction? You are not alone. If you call Recovery Centers of America today at 1-888-RECOVERY, your whole family can begin to recover. At Recovery Centers of America at Capital Region and Bracebridge Hall, your loved one will be treated with care by expert addiction professionals, while family programming will give you support and healing so that you can recover as well. RCA accepts insurance, provides transportation, and offers intervention services. Call 1-888-RECOVERY now.
It used to be hard to find the exact auto parts you needed, and that meant spending a lot of time at swap meets. It's a different game now when you can order exactly what you need from eBay Motors. They have 122 million parts, so you can always find the right fitment. Spend less time searching and more time building with the eBay Motors app, or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo. I'm with my awesome friend, Steve. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Well, yeah, my name is Steve McRae. I am a YouTuber / blogger. I have a blog on epistemology called 3 a.m. Philosophy that I kind of do from a layperson's perspective. And I have the Steve McRae channel and the Great Debate Community channel. And then I used to have, well, I still own it legally through the court system, but I do not have it in my possession, a channel called The Non Sequitur Show, which was a very popular podcast / YouTube channel at one time.
So you seem to be an agnostic, right? Bro, that's how you identify in terms of your beliefs and all that?
Yeah, I hold to more philosophical understandings rather than the group lay atheists that you find out there that basically put forth this narrative that atheism is merely a lack of belief, which they can for their groups. I mean, you can find words any way you want. There's no intrinsic meaning to a word. So for their groups, that's, if they want to do that, that's great. I'm not in their groups. I read actual peer-reviewed papers. I read books written by well-established, very well-known, recognizable names of philosophers. And in philosophy, the most commonly accepted understanding of atheism is the belief that God does not exist, or more specifically, the belief that the proposition of theism is false. But as an agnostic, that is somebody who has tried to evaluate the proposition of God existing, but has suspended judgment on it and therefore has no position either way on it. They do not believe the proposition is true. They do not believe the proposition is false. It is in the realm of the domain called ontology rather than epistemology, and has nothing to do with knowledge when it comes to my position. So when I'm saying I'm agnostic, I'm not referring to in any way dealing with any kind of Gnostic or anything dealing with knowledge that is dealing with the etymology of the word, but not the usage of the word as normative in epistemology.
All right. And I want you to sort of tell us, me and the audience, sort of your background on philosophy and religion, and maybe your journey from like when you were a child to, teenage years into your formative years, and how you've arrived at being an agnostic.
Sure. Okay. So my background was mostly in the nuclear field. I was in the nuclear Navy. I was a machinist mate first class. I was engine room supervisor. I had to be the one to kind of training people to operate the nuclear power plant. So that was most of my background. I've always been in science and things of that nature. However, when I reached YouTube, I started getting into debunking young Earth creationism. And that led me down a path of philosophy. And so for the last 8 years or so, I've been really trying to learn philosophy, mostly on my own. I am autodidactic in it for the most part, but I have a lot of friends who are very well versed in philosophy that I go to for guidance. And of course, nowadays with the internet, you have a plethora of resources at your fingertips. I mean, if I had today, what we had back when I was growing up, I couldn't imagine where I'd be. I don't think people I don't think people appreciate how easy it is to find information nowadays. Back in my day, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we had these things and they were called books. And in those things, they had these things of paper that were made out of trees, and on them were words. Yeah, I know. People think it's weird, right? They're like, "What are you talking about, Steve? I've never heard of such a things." And then they're collected in these groups called libraries, and you had to go to the library, and you could actually take out one of those books.
Wait, you have to go there?
Read it.
You actually have to
Yeah,
go
they didn't
there.
send it to you. There was no Uber driver for libraries back then, although that would have been a really good idea. Why didn't I think of that 30 years ago? Library Uber. You want to check out a book, they'll bring it to you. That would have been brilliant. Wow. But no, so nowadays we have the ability to read things, and almost every book is PDF form. And there's a whole bunch of tutorials, and there's so many videos you can watch. And so if you don't understand something, you can go to a tutorial video on YouTube, and somebody somewhere has made a video about it. If they didn't do a good job, somebody else has made a tutorial about it. They're a dime a dozen for the most part. And so I've even made tutorial videos. So I wanted to really dive into philosophy because I've realized over the years that science is great. I love science, but without philosophy, science is useless. There's no guiding principles behind it. There's no foundation for science. Science adheres by what is called methodological naturalism, which basically in a nutshell is that they don't posit any supernatural causation. They're kind of barred from it. What they want to do is they say, okay, I have a naturalistic phenomenon and I want to find a naturalistic explanation for it. That's what science does. It is the business to explain. And they don't want to posit any supernatural causation. This is why the whole God proposition is excluded from science. It doesn't address it, right? So we cannot say, hey, I see a rainbow. What caused that rainbow? God did it. That is excluded in science. There's something called non-overlapping magisteria, as Stephen Jay Gould would put it, where you keep science and religion completely separate. Now, we can address certain claims, obviously, like if we see a statue of Jesus that is crying red tears or something, we can say, okay, let's see if we can find a naturalistic explanation for this. We can never conclude a supernatural one, but we can say, oh, we found the cause of this. It was a broken, rusty toilet pipe that had been leaking that is causing this kind of thing, right? So we can do that. But I think when a lot of people get into these conversations, they neglect the importance of the underlying foundational issues of philosophy: reason, logic, epistemology, beliefs, knowledge, axiology, all these things that contribute to our belief formation, that without them, what good would science do?
And I guess when it comes to the belief in God, right? So you're someone who's suspending judgment in that area. Can you tell me, I guess, your thought process on how you've considered all the data and analyzed all the metaphysical arguments and all the theist claims and atheist arguments also, and what made you sort of arrive at this conclusion that I'm just going to suspend judgment because there's not enough information, I guess, to make a conclusive judgment?
Yeah, sure. A lot of that is called evidential agnosticism, which I kind of tend to, and it's also called zero data agnosticism, or weak agnosticism, or the temporal agnosticism is what I used to call it, and it still applies. I used to say I was a temporal agnostic, but it confused people, so I kind of stepped away from it, even though it still applies. But yeah, so I grew up a non-believer for the most part. My family was not very religious. My mom was Jewish. My dad was Protestant. My brother, who was no longer with us, was Jehovah's Witness, and my sister didn't even bother with any of it. So I didn't really get involved in anything religious until I was about maybe 15 or 16. But I grew up with people that were Mormon that I knew almost my entire life, and I used to go to their churches. I did become Mormon when I was 17. I got baptized. And that was based upon an experience that I had that I attributed to some kind of supernatural causation. I still can't explain it to this day. I'm not even going to attempt to, but it was a very real phenomenon that I experienced, right? I mean, we have what's called incorrigible beliefs, such as like experiencing pain. If I'm experiencing pain, it is a fact that I'm experiencing pain. And so I had a experience that is a fact that I had an experience. Now, what caused that, I have no idea at this point, right? I mean, I couldn't, at the time I concluded because of the situation that it was somehow related to God. And I made that inductive leap, right? But I've realized over the years that I don't think it was rational for me to make that inductive leap without more information. And so I've had experiences before, like weird things happen with Ouija boards, and I'm not saying that I believe in the supernatural. What I'm saying is there's been things that have happened in my personal experience that give me pause to say, okay, I'm just going to suspend judgment on this because I don't think I have sufficient justification either way to say there's no God. or there is a God. I'm still looking, right? I'm that what's called non-resistant non-believer for the problem of divine hiddenness, which is if God wants to have a personal relationship with me and I'm a non-resistant non-believer, then he should reach out and let me know that he exists. That's the way an omnibenevolent, omnipotent being would be. So I have, like you said, perfectly and well elocuted. You said, I suspend judgment on that. And that's exactly what the agnostic position is. It is the suspension of judgment that you don't take a position either way. Now, lay atheist groups, they call that atheist, right? That's their terminology for it, which again, they're completely allowed to do. But they don't speak for the philosophical community. They don't speak for academia. They don't speak for anybody outside their community. And my thing has been for years to get them to realize that what they're doing is they're putting their own personal usage of these terms, which are atypical, non-standard, and they're trying to ubiquitously and categorically apply them to everybody else. Well, you know who else does that? Young Earth creationist, right? Species is kind, theory is guess, evolution's change. It's the exact same thing. These things are descriptive terms. Definitions are descriptive, right? They're not prescriptive. A dictionary doesn't tell you how to define a word. It tells you how the word is being used. Mathematics has prescriptive definitions, right? So you can prescriptively say 0 factorial is equal to 1. You can define it to be that way out of nothing. But in semantics, the dictionary is a very general usage book that tells you, hey, this is how that word is being used in society. It doesn't tell you that you have to use it that way. And so when they see a dictionary that says, oh, atheism is the disbelief, which means belief in negation or lack of belief, they're saying this is how you have to use this word as either one or the other, which means if you have lack of belief, you have both necessary and sufficient conditions, which in philosophy would not be the case. And that's why I've been doing what I'm doing for so many years, because they're trying to do exactly what they're arguing against theists doing. Exactly. Not recognizing that. And I find that to be an inconsistent logical system. And I hate to say it, pure hypocrisy.
All right. And so I guess what you're saying is that if they want to use like a term like atheism or agnosticism, they have to sort of follow the mainstream philosophical way it is being used, right? Because
no, they don't have to do anything. They can do it any way they want. The problem is they can't tell anybody else what to do. They can't force their look. If a young Earth creationist says, "Hey, Elmo, species is equal to kind," they're the same thing. So or theory is merely a guess, therefore evolution is a guess. Now, putting aside any equivocation arguments, which somebody always tries to bring up, and that's not the case. It's not an equivocation issue. Matter of fact, you can actually say, here's a dictionary, and I've seen them, theory, guess, right? It says theory is a guess. And so you're not having an equivocation issue if you say theory is a guess, evolution is a theory, evolution is a guess. In that context, in that schema, because you're using the word theory as a guess. Right? You're saying, right? You're not using it as a well-substantiated body of evidence. That's what it would be in science, a well-substantiated body of evidence that explains facts, makes predictive abilities, explanatory things. So that's how that word is used in science. Now, what would happen if they were in some kind of discussion and a young Earth creationist said, hey, evolution is just a guess. And I'm using a dictionary. Well, you can't do that. We use the technical terms. We use the more precise, what's called sensu stricto terms in science, but they don't have the same thing that they do in philosophy. They don't do it. They in philosophy, they say, oh, we're going to use the weaker terms. And I find it to be rather bizarre, right? They're very precise in science, but very imprecise when it comes to philosophy. And that seems to make no sense to me, because if you're going to hold to one standard and say, look, I'm not going to let a young creationist tell me that a theory is a guess, but I'll let, atheism be this lack of belief, contrary to what is found in the literature, then of course, what are they telling me? They're telling me the same thing a flat earth would tell me, or young Earth creationists would tell me. And I have to tell them, look, you can use these terms, but don't expect somebody like myself to use your terms when I'm using much more precise terminology that's normative. And what I mean by normative is you ought to use it if you want to understand a paper in that case, right? If I go read a paper in epistemology and I use their terminology, I'm going to be extremely confused, because no paper uses their terminology that I've ever found. There might be one. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm going to die on the hill that there's no paper out there that uses their terminology. I've never read one, and I've read quite a bit of papers. There's papers that have talked about it, like Anthony Flew, Michael Martin, Stephen Bullivant in Oxford's Handbook of Atheism. I've read all those. They only discuss it, but there's no paper out there that starts off atheism, not believing God exists, and then derives from there that I've ever seen. In fact, if you go to read a paper called I don't remember the name. It's by P.K. Moser, but it even starts off. It's about evidential agnosticism, actually, and evidential atheism. And it starts off. We can define atheism many ways, but the simplest way to define atheism is God does not exist. Right? That's how it starts off. God does not exist. So if you use their understandings, how would you read that paper?
It could be confusing. Yeah.
It'd be extremely difficult. Yeah. And so my goal is to educate people so if they want to learn these topics, they can learn them, take a course in it, and pass.
Oh, that's cool, man. And I guess then maybe we can move on from the semantics, because you've established that this is what atheism means, and this is what agnosticism means, right? And we have to sort of
generally speaking, in the domain of discourse.
Yeah, in the domain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So maybe then we could sort of dive into looking at how you've arrived and actually decided for yourself that where, for example, like if a theist tells you like, oh, this is the Kalam cosmological argument, this is the moral argument for God, this is the all those arguments, but how did you like arrive at your thinking that says that I'm just gonna have to suspend judgment right now because it's not enough for me to conclusively say that there is a God in positive
Yeah, so I mean, you have to look at all the arguments individually, right? Like, for example, the Kalam cosmological argument. I will deny the premises, especially premise one, because I think it's vague what the word cause, right? The universe began, therefore has a cause, kind of thing. So when you look at like Aristotelian causes, there's 4 types of causes, and so what cause do they mean? Do they mean an efficient cause? Do they mean a final cause? What are they talking about there? And so, yeah, it's great to talk about, but it's not very convincing. Perfectly valid. The Kalam cosmological argument is a valid argument, right? And it's odd when even when I hear atheists say, well, that's not valid. Well, of course it is. It's simple modus ponens. It's a valid rule of inference. Now, you could say it's not sound because the premises aren't sound. Maybe because the conditional isn't sound true, or the second premise would be false. Okay, but then you have to argue that. Yeah, it's absolutely valid either way, right? If you deny the premises, how does the Kalam go? It goes, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause, right? The simplest version of it. Is that right? Okay. So the second premise, the universe began to exist, you have to be able to accept that or not, and give reasons why. But the first one, the conditional, that's always true unless the antecedent Q is false and P is true. So if the universe began to exist is true, the universe has a cause is false, then that conditional premise is false. But other than that conditional is true. But I would say that premise would be false only because the universe may not have had a cause. I don't subscribe to the principle of sufficient reason, right? So I'm happy to say, yes, you know what? The universe has a brute fact contingent thing that's why we have, something rather than nothing. I don't have the capacity to understand it. I think we have epistemic limitations because of biological evolution. I think our brains just can't handle apprehending certain things. And I'm happy to leave it there for me, right? I understand there are people that aren't happy to leave it there, and they'll dive into this stuff a lot more than I will, but they're a hell of a lot smarter than I am, and that's what they get paid to do. So they can do that. But each argument's different. So, when you're talking about, Aquinas' 5 ways, or you're talking about even atheist arguments, like argument, against God, more ontological arguments against God, and moral arguments against God, and divine hiddenness, and logical problem of evil. Each one has to be evaluated independently. And then I think if somebody wants to run the argument that, look, there are more, at least weak arguments for like atheism than there are for the existence of God, right? As an aggregate. And therefore I don't believe in God, or I believe that God does not exist would be more applicable. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think that's perfectly fine, because I think there are some strong atheist arguments out there, and a lot of the lack belief atheists don't run any of them, right? They're like, oh, I have no burden of proof. I don't have to give any reasons for why I don't believe. Well, actually you do in epistemology. Even not having a belief requires a burden of justification, and they've been ingrained to believe that's not true. but I sure it is, because I mean, I've written about this, and I've written based upon Dr. Malik's work, who has reviewed my work and said that is in accordance to his paper, which was Defining Atheism and the Burden of Proof, that yes, even having a non-position requires some justificatory reasons for it. For example, Elmo, if I asked you, hey, do you believe that I exist? Okay, but what happens if you were to say, I don't believe that you exist, Steve? Would I not look at you like you're probably insane? I would want to know why you have the position you don't believe that I exist, right? You have a burden of proof to make that position rational. And even though it's not a direct position on the proposition, it is an indirect position on the proposition. It's a belief about a belief. It's a second order position, right? There's only two direct positions on the question of God existing, yes or no. So true or false. So on the proposition of God existing, that if I believe it's true, I have a direct answer. Yes, it's true. If I believe it's false, I have a direct answer. No, to the question, does God exist? Those are two direct answers. There's only two, but there's indirect, right? And so the indirect would be, hey, look, I don't even know how to answer this question. I don't know how to answer. It's not that I don't know, it has anything to do with knowledge or epistemology. It's ordinary doubt. I am unable to answer this question. So that's a second order position, but it still requires a justificatory conditions of why you think you are unable to satisfactorily come to a conclusion one way or the other. And a lot of people, for some reason, balk at that. And I don't get it. It makes sense. Why would you not want to explain to somebody why your position is rational? I don't understand that, right? So, and by the way, I apologize. I've had a lot of coffee, so cut me off at any time.
It's all right, man. I love just listening to you, man. I learn a lot, actually. And when you mentioned that, yeah, even if you're in a position of doubt and still on suspending judgment on whether God is real or not real, and whether you believe it or not, that you have to sort of give an actual justification for doubt as well. I never thought about that actually.
A lot of people don't, and that's why a lot of people in those realms don't really have great fondness for me, because I explain to people, hey, you know what they're telling you may want to think about. Right, I'm that one guy that throws the wrench into the cogs and go, hey, your system isn't really coherent, right? An inconsistent logical system would be a system where all the premises can't be true at once. And I explain to people, look, you can use any usages you want, but let's look to see what follows. And again, you can say, look, I don't have to have a reason to not believe. Okay, then you don't have a rational reason not to believe, because when we're talking about burden of proof, we're talking about burdens of justification. We're not talking like you have to prove anything. It's like Big Bang, right? The Big Bang clearly wasn't a bang, right? It's a descriptive term that they use to call it that. But the burden of proof, which comes from onus probandi, was a legal term. But we're not talking about the law system. We're talking about epistemology. So in epistemology, the burden of proof is akin to the burden of justification, which is the reasons why you hold or don't hold a particular position. That's what it means. That's what is understood, I should say, in the literature. So when people say, "Well, I don't have a burden of proof," they're saying, "I don't have a reason to be rational."
Yeah, and I like asking you to join some of my discussions on Facebook, because like you sort of tell you, I guess you're an atheist too, but by in a way
by their definition, but
yeah, by their definition.
Yeah, but that's funny, because if you go by what they say, and I've written logical proofs on this, it also means I'm a theist as well. So I'm an atheist, agnostic, and I'm a theist. It's like, okay, what good are these terms any longer? And they don't understand that either. They're like, wait a minute, no, you don't believe you're an atheist, but you also don't believe the negation that God does not exist. So you're a fence sitter like I am if you're a lack belief atheism. They're the same logical position, which means you're also a weak theist. So if you're a weak atheist, you're agnostic, you're a weak theist. And if you want to make it normative that weak atheism is atheism, then you can make it normative that weak theism is theism, because they're called subcontraries. They both can be true, but they both can't be false, but they have to exist coextensively. You can't have weak atheism without weak theism. One does not exist without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like those who sort of identify themselves like the typical atheist, just lack of belief. I yeah, that's why I like you, bro, because you sort of tell them that, hey, you have to justify your lack of belief. They just say that, oh no, let me give you
to be rational, right? And they have no onus to, right? They're not there's no obligatory thing where they have to do it, but you can't say I have a rational stance with respect to this proposition and I'm not justifying it, or I can't justify it. Then you don't have a rational position. Now, let me clarify. It does not mean that they have an irrational position, right? They may have an irrational position. Just because you're not rational, it doesn't mean you're necessarily irrational. You could be irrational. For example, properly basic beliefs, ones that are very foundational, that are not derived from anything else. They're non-dosastic, they're non-inferential. You can't get them from anything. They're foundational. Those are irrational. So like I accept that the uniformity of nature is going to continue day after day, and then induction will work day after day. As Hume pointed out in the problem of induction, you can't justify that. It would be circular to do so, because you would have to use induction to justify induction, which obviously is circular. So the atheist and the theist and the agnostic and everybody else that's ever lived has to bite the bullet on that and to say, yes, I can't justify induction. But okay, it's an irrational belief then. It's not irrational, but you can't justify it. So you can't say it's irrational because look, it's properly basic. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm really amazed by that you actually sort of agree with that there are things that are properly basic. I guess this is something that Alvin Plantinga sort of proposed, right?
Yeah, well, it's classical foundationalism is what it is. Plantinga runs with it. Now, I do disagree with Plantinga on the fact that he thinks that God is properly basic. Okay? I don't see how he gets that. Now, he may have identified somehow a basic belief. I get that. The belief of God could be a basic belief, but I don't know how he justifies it being a properly basic belief, because there's certain conditions for basicality. One of which is generally understood as it has to be applied to everybody, right? We all have to accept that external minds exist to function in society. That's properly basic, right? I can't prove that you have an independent conscious thought. That's the problem of hard solipsism, right? If I could, then I'd probably make it bank, as a philosopher. But the problem of hard solipsism is that I cannot demonstrate that you have an independent mind, right? I have to assume it, and that's perfectly fine. It's a properly basic belief because it's on pains of irrationality, and so I don't see how you can say, look, God has to apply to everybody. I don't believe in God, so therefore, how is it a properly basic belief? He argues that it is. He thinks that it is. So I disagree with him on that. But how he talks about properly basic beliefs, yes, absolutely. I tend to that for classical foundationalism. But there's other things out there too. There's coherentism and other frameworks as well.
Maybe if we could sort of move on from the God discussion, just to finalize that, maybe you could give a brief explanation as to why, as to what your justification is for your doubt of, second order doubt of why God is not or is.
Well, like I said, it's basically, if I did my personal experience, I probably would be an atheist, right? But I have to be true to myself, and I have to recognize that I have had subjective experiences. Now, I have a term for this. It's my own term. You won't find it anywhere, and that's perfectly fine. People can make up their own terms if they make sense, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's how we get new things in the literature. So I have a term, and I call it non-transportable justification. What that means is I can justify myself using my subjective experience, but because it's subjective, because that qualia and sense data that I have is unable to be given to somebody else, it's non-transportable. I can't just take it out of my body and give it to you so you can experience it. Then I have to realize that, okay, I've had these experiences. What are they? I don't know. I'm not going to give it a judgment on that, but that balances out the facts that, look, people have been talking about God for thousands of years. 2 billion people on the planet believe God exists. That's something that we have to deal with, right? It's not like we're waging wars with each other over leprechauns and fairies and dragons, right? This isn't the Game of Thrones. So, it's not on the same level. The religion has been pervasive in cultures all throughout history in every part of the world. And I think it's very disingenuous to put it on the same level as, oh, well, it's in the same category as pixies and fairies. I don't think so. At least not on a social aspect. If they want to put it on the same level as an epistemic or like mythos kind of thing, I get that. I'm not even going to try to argue against that. But the effects it's had on culture is massive. And so I have to ask myself, look, I know a lot of smart people, way smarter than I ever be. And they believe God exists. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, what is it that they have experienced that I've experienced things that I can't explain. Maybe they experienced something that, hey, look, to them, that's God. And it might be even more convincing than what I've had, right? And I'll use the example. I don't want to take up too much of the mic here, but remember like the movie Contact with Jodie Foster? Okay, so they build this machine and she goes to another planet and she visits, some planet way off in the edge of the universe or something like that. And she sees an alien, which in the form of her father, but she comes back and nobody's known she left because at the time on the Earth had not really passed. There was like a few seconds, but she knew she had that experience for a very long time. Now you come to find out, on her little recorder, there was like hours of static, right? So there was some evidential proof, but if she didn't even have that, how would she ever convince anybody else that she had that trip, right? She wouldn't be able to do so. No matter what she does, nobody could experience what she has experienced, even though she would be convinced that she had gone and talked to some alien. She would believe it. She'd know it. It was true, even with justified true belief, because it happened. We watched it happen on the screen. So we assume it wasn't like her imagination. We assume that the storyteller is telling us she actually went. So she would have justification to have knowledge about that, but she couldn't give that knowledge to anybody else. And so it's one of those things is maybe there's religious people out there that had things that they justified to themselves that God exists. And I have no issue with that. And I just weighed those kinds of things in myself. But like I said, if I never had any experiences in my entire life, I probably would tend to naturalism.
I'm really curious though, because if you're someone who's sort of suspending judgment on a huge question of whether God does or doesn't exist, that means that you're still sort of on the fence about it, right? And when it comes to that, how does it impact the rest of your belief system, like what you believe about morality, about existentialism, about even about just the normal basic stuff about whether or not there is a right or wrong afterlife and all that stuff. Like, how do you answer all those questions?
Well, okay, the agnostic is a fencer, right? That's not a pejorative term. That's what they are. They're fencing between two positions. The position that they believe God exists and the position they believe that God does not exist. So the agnostic is between atheism and theism, philosophically speaking. Now, I don't know how, if you have like thousands of people may listen to your podcast, and many of them are going to go, wait a minute, there's no middle ground between theist and atheism. They have to understand that that's only in those lay atheist groups. You're only going to find that in the Atheist Community of Austin, American Atheist, Atheist Republic. Those groups use those types of terminologies. But in academia, right, in philosophy, that is not the case. And so I'm in the framework, I'm in the schema of academia and philosophy. So in that framework, they have to understand that's where I'm coming from. Agnostic is between theist and atheist. The lack of belief atheist is actually in the same position I am. They are a fence sitter. American Atheist promotes fence sitting. But how it affects my views like morality, I do tend to object to morality, right? Moral realism. I like the idea of Mackey's error theory, such that there are moral propositions, but they happen to be all false because of basically what's called the argument from queerness, or an instantiation error. And I get that, but I think that because of that, that's a moral non-cognitivist position, and it doesn't really tell us anything prescriptive. It's just a descriptive usage. But I think that we can make an argument for moral realism, as long as if there's a proposition out there that is true, that is not based on anybody's subjectivity, then there's a case for objective morals. And I ground that in eudaimonia, which is basically human flourishing, harms and benefits. And I happen to think that, look, the reason we have morals is because we are a collective in society. We are a societal creature, and we have developed a need to get along. And so if we all went out and did our own thing, society would not flourish. And so there are some things that I find to be objectively the case, right? For example, Emil, if I stole your food all the time, like every time you had you have a food in your hand and I took it away from you, it is objectively true you're going to die. Okay, that is not up for evaluation. It's an objective fact. And so you could say, look, it is objectively true that is harmful that if I take your food every day, right? There's no subjective evaluation to that. And by the way, I use the term objective, meaning that anybody can go learn these things, right? Because if I keep taking your food,
Wait, the
die,
question
somebody else
though.
could do the same thing and find
Oh,
out.
it's
right?
objective that I'm gonna die, but is it objective that it's bad that I'm gonna die?
Well, again, the whole thing for morality is what are we trying to accomplish for it, right? What are we saying is a right or wrong moral act? I mean, you could argue, well, what is wrong with letting somebody die? Well, again, it goes back to the grounding of the thing that we as a society, if we all took each other's food, so a lot of people are going to die. Now, some people that took the food are going to live, but you know what? Somebody's going to take your food too.
Right? So you sort of like presupposing that
why you want to have morality in the
so the grounding is sort of the survival of the human species. Is that?
Yeah, it's for human flourishing, called harms and benefits, right? I mean, the theists will ground it in God, and they'll say, look, whatever God commands. Well, not all theists, but many theists will ground it in, hey, look, divine command theory. What God says is good. What God says is the right course of action. Your abeyance to it is what morally good, right? So it's not merely for the fact that God said it. I mean, I understand the youthful dilemma, but let's put aside the youthful dilemma for a second. The way divine command theory works is that if God commands this to be ethically correct, it is you obeying that commandment that makes that action morally good. And so morals can be based on rules, they can be based on actions, they can be based on intent. There's consequentialism, utilitarianism.
But what you did though was that you sort of juxtapose the theist divine command theory with you sort of following the eudaimonia thing for society as well. So
yeah, well, I mean, because you got to ground it in something, right? Because again, what's the point of having?
Yeah, that's why there are nihilists, though, right?
Oh, certainly. Oh, absolutely. Error theory is considered to be moral nihilism as well, right? An error theorist is a moral nihilist, although there's two senses of the word moral nihilist. That's one sense. The other sense of moral nihilist is that, why have any morals? What who cares? We're all going to die anyways, kind of thing, right?
But which one are you a nihilist though?
No. I think in axiological terms, I think life does have some kind of intrinsic value. I think that we also give it value, and I think that the fact that we only have one life is important.
Wow, it's awesome. Wow. Okay, so you're an agnostic, right? You're suspending judgment on God and all this because you don't have enough information. But but there's something like intrinsic value in human life that you're willing to presuppose.
Yeah, I mean, there are arguments for it. There's a professor named Parfet, and he grounds it in what's called intuitionism, and way complicated, way beyond my pay grade, let me tell you. But he makes some really good arguments about intuitionism, and there's logic even derived from our intuition called intuitionist logic that even has things like denying the law of excluded middle, law denies double negation, but it's more in line of how we actually think, right? So I think that because we want to have a moral system, right? I mean, if not, what's the point, right? So we want to have a moral system, and then we kind of build it up from there and say, okay, what are the axioms that we want for the system? If we agree upon the axioms, then you can build an objective moral framework, exactly like what it is in mathematics. Right? 1 + 1 is equal to 2 objectively, right? And the reason, even though it has arbitrary axioms, right? The rules have arbitrary axioms. Peano's axiom is arbitrary. Same with any kind of ZFC. You can take or reject any axiom if you want to build a constructive approach to mathematics. The thing is, though, once you have your axioms from there, you can derive an objective system, which means that anybody can go look at it, right? Subjective means that only I can experience it, or only you can experience, right? So like my pain, if I have a headache, that is subjective. The reason being is not because I'm just kind of like, oh, it's my own opinion. It's subjective because you can't experience my pain. It is epistemically off limits to you, right? You can objectively see them having pain by machines, right? Okay, yeah, Steve is experiencing something. That's objective because you can witness that. But the experience itself, the qualia or the sense data or whatever you want to call it, that itself is only mine. And so I cannot get you to experience my pain and my headache. So that's the difference between objective and subjective in most cases. Now, the problem with those terms is that a lot of authors out there use these terms very differently, which leads to a lot of confusion. You have to know how the author's actually using that term in their paper. morality is one of those messy things I've ever seen in philosophy.
Okay, but so I guess then what the question is that what do you mean by objective, right? Is it because you're talking about intrinsic meaning? Is it an intrinsic meaning that we humans sort of project to other humans and ourselves, or is it something like innate in the being of that?
Yeah, it's kind of in the being. Like, okay, like I said, objective means that somebody else can go figure it out. Like, for example, if I take your food and you die, is it objective that somebody else can do the same thing and they'll get the same results? It's objectively verifiable in that case, right? So, yeah, like for example, if you and I decide to play a game of chess, my co-host named Cheshire, so I always say chess when I mean chess. But if we want to play chess, right, we both can go read the rules of the game of chess and say, okay, once we decide we're going to play this game, then we know the rules are objective. Now somebody can say, well, yeah, but the rules are arbitrary. Yeah, so what? That makes no. You can't just do this with subjective reductionism and say, oh, well, everything's subjective. That's nonsense. It is objectively the case. If we want to play chess, there are rules to it. You can change those rules, but then you aren't playing chess anymore. You're playing some other game, right? Or at least a variation of chess. But the game itself, chess, has a very defined set of rules.
In a way, like for example, for a theist to say that, oh, we have objective morality, it's actually like subjective to God's morality. So yeah, theists actually say that we have the divine command theory and the objective meaning and objective morality sources from God. But the fact is, it's actually also subjective to God what morality is and what the meaning of our lives is, right?
Yeah,
so,
it's actually called ethical subjectivism.
Yeah. So in a way,
divine command theory is commonly known as ethical subjectivism. Now, there are arguments out there for ethical objectivism from divine command theory. I don't know how good they really are to me because, you're grounding in a being that, you have to make a lot of presuppositions for. One, he's all good. He wants the best for you. He created the best possible world. You have all these, things you've got to assume. And then, it's basically dependent upon his mind, right? I mean, those rules come from him. So how do I objectively evaluate that those rules are objective morals? How do I, if I've got, putting God aside, how would I go out and objectively evaluate those principles? Because I'm not in his head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so in this case, then, yeah, you have you believe in like objective moral realism, is that right?
Yeah, I do tend to moral realism. I think, generally speaking, from what I've read, most philosophers, atheists and theists, tend to moral realism.
Okay, cool. So can you talk about more like of the specific axioms that you have for your moral system that guides you to determine whether or not an action is immoral or amoral, actually? Like, what does it mean for something to be not moral as well?
Sure. By the way, you asked really good questions, by the way. Holy cow. I mean,
thank you, man.
Really good. It's like you've done this before.
I've done this like 150 times now.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are questions I don't normally ever get asked, so I'm actually really impressed. I tend to virtue epistemology and virtue ethics. Okay, so virtue, and again, these are just things that I happen to like. So virtue epistemology is basically the virtues dealing with epistemic things, like being open-minded, right? The ability to change one's mind when given new data, right? Because we know people out there, they're not open-minded, right? I mean, there are people out there, no matter what you tell them, they have what's called, what was his name? Not Maxwell's demon or Descartes' demon, but there's a young creationist that had a demon that he had in his head that he would call. It wasn't true. I mean, it wasn't like he actually believed it, but he would be like it would be like any information that he received would be kicked out by this demon that contradicted his younger creationist beliefs. Okay. And so there are people out there, no matter what you tell them, they will deny it, right? They just won't accept it. And so they don't have that epistemic virtue of being open-minded. So that's more virtue epistemology, about knowledge and things of that nature. And virtue ethics is what I tend to, is basically an Aristotelian type approach, such that you have some virtue that you want to aspire to. It's based on your character, right? So it's internal. And this thing that you're trying to aspire to is between two polar opposites that are vices. So, for example, if I want to aspire to being courageous, that is in between two positions of being cowardly and being reckless, right? I mean, if you think about this, if you're a soldier, it's one thing to be brave, right? You don't want to be a coward, but you don't want to be so brave that you're reckless, because then you get yourself and other people killed. There's a happy medium between those two things. So the virtue is something that lies between two vices based upon your own system, I guess, your own code of what you think is virtuous, right? To me, and I think something like being brave is something we want to aspire to, right? So it's virtuous to do brave things. That's how virtue.
Yeah, but before that, before we go forward, so virtue ethics, right, and the virtue epistemology, was that, is that what you said? Yeah. So these two things, are they grounded on the moral realism that you proposed earlier?
Well, no, they're two different things, right? One tells us,
So is it like a coherent moral system, or you just sort of, no?
Well, one just tells us that moral facts exist, right? One's a normative ethical theory and one's a meta-ethical theory, right? So moral realism is a meta-ethical theory. It tells us moral facts exist. They can, by the way, they can be or be objective, or they can be just subjective. It's not one or the other. There's no hard binary thing. It doesn't have to be the case where all morals are subjective, all morals are objective. There's a combination, but that's a meta-ethical theory. The normative ethical theory, like virtue ethics, that tells us how we should act, right? What is the right course of action should I do here? Right?
Wait. So the normative ethical theory, why where did it come from? Like, because you're someone who's very, very strict on what you believe in, right, and what you hold, and normative is something you just made up of your mind, basically, is what you're saying, right? And so why do you hold these things?
No, I'm not intransigent. I'm flexible on my beliefs. But we all if we want to pick a system of what we think we should apply when we have a normative ethical theory, there's a lot of things we can apply. I mean, the whole trolley car problem basically is an experiment, a mind experiment on how to appeal to consequentialism or utilitarianism. And I appeal a lot to virtue epistemology. Now, that doesn't mean I have to stick with that. I mean, there's no reason to. The Kantian, for example, is preferential. Yeah. So the Kantian would say, like, for example, you should never lie, right? And so when the German comes, knocking on the door, are there Jews in your attic? The Kantian would say yes, right? Because his form of truth is that he should never lie. Now, one could argue the way that they would be like, oh, well, what happens if you say yes, they go upstairs and the Jews ran out the back door and now they're safe because he told the truth, right? That gave them time to escape. That's the way a Kantian would look at it. Now, I don't agree with that particular position, obviously, but a Kantian would say you just never lie. It's a categorical thing. You don't lie. But a consequentialist would say there are times to lie based upon the consequences of your actions. And as a virtue person, I would say there are times to lie to save one's feelings, right? Because you want to be honest, but honesty is a virtue that's between two vices, dishonesty and lying, and the other vice, which is going to be brute honesty, where you're so honest that you hurt people's feelings, right? Can you imagine in a world where everybody is so brutally honest that everybody gets their feelings hurt? Now, me, I tend to not to say anything, right? I don't want to even give it a white lie. We all do it. We've all had to. I mean, especially if you've got kids. Every parent has given white lies to their kids. It just, name one parent that ever has their lying, right? But we do it for a reason, right? We do it because we don't want to hurt them, especially as they formulate their own ethical systems. And so when I say that I tend to virtue epistemology, or virtue ethics, that just tells you that in a normative ethical system, what would Steve do given this case? Most of the time, again, there are other systems we can apply to as well, or appeal to, I'm sorry.
Okay, cool. So I'm very, curious about why you would actually have these preferential virtue ethics and epistemology. So it's a preferential moral system, but you also mix it with some sort of moral realism. So when, let's say you've come to the decision of, let's say, like abortion, right? Is it so? Let's say you hold a certain position on that, you're either pro or you're con. But how do you then decide with your moral realism, but you also have this normative ethics that is just preferential to you? So how do you decide whether or not you're pro-abortion or you're con-abortion if you have these two sort of contradicting things?
Okay. Well, two things. One, by the way, I had to look it up. It was Glenn Morton, so it's called Morton's Demon. I'm sorry,
Okay,
I couldn't
cool.
think of the name of it.
Cool,
I'm not
cool.
OCD, but I couldn't think of the name of it. Even though I should have known.
It's
one
alright.
you know those things that you know, but you just can't.
Yeah, it's
So,
the tip
Glenn
at the tip
Morton
of their
was the name.
tongue. Yeah.
So for your audience, Morton's Demon, if they want to go, if you want to go look it up. So how I pick it, I choose those things because I find it works for me. It's simple as that, right? There's no way you can, prescriptively say this is the normative ethical theory that you have to use. How would you do that, right? I've just found that in my life, virtue ethics seems to work best for me, right? Rather than, the Kantian approach. Like, for example, I always felt that you always have to tell the truth, even though it can get people killed. I'm going to have problems with that from a virtue ethical standpoint, right? I would much rather lie to the German and say, yeah, I got no Jews here, especially because I got Jewish heritage, right? My mom's Jewish, which makes me Jewish. So I just think that it's what people kind of grow, I guess, to develop over a period of time and what they find works for them. There's no prescriptive way to do it. The facts that they have these ethical theories that they can appeal to, both meta-ethical and normative ethical. And there's also applied ethics, by the way, too, that people have to deal with, right? Bioethical concerns is applied ethics. I think that if people want to, become an ethical kind of person, that they look into these ethical theories and see which one works for them. Because a lot of people do it, intuitively in some ways.
Yeah.
But
I guess when you say work works for them, you sort of mean like a pragmatic thing, though.
Yeah, exactly. A pragmatic approach.
Okay. All right. Okay. I guess I sort of get a picture of your moral system and why you are an agnostic and your justification for your suspense of judgment. Maybe we could for the last 10 minutes we could talk about sort of like an existential approach, maybe, because I'm really curious. All right. I don't know. I you're familiar probably with the like absurdism and Camus and all that. And Sartre and Nietzsche. So, but and you're not a nihilist. So, I don't know if you don't know whether or
I
not
don't
God.
nihilism, Nietzsche's nihilism, or
yeah,
anything like that. Like, I mean, the existential problem was basically trying to resolve. Like, for example, I don't know. Have you heard of absurdism? Yeah, they're trying to resolve and somehow find a man's search for meaning and not finding anything, right? And it is kind of frustrating because there are so many questions out there, and it is hard for some kind of existential things. Like, why is the universe so vast and we're in the middle of nowhere kind of thing? No life around us that we found, no alien life yet. Why are we, why do we exist? Why does DNA give us the ability to have complex life? Why did
questions I ask myself every day, man?
Yeah, I mean, these are hard questions that a lot of people don't take the time to really ponder. Yet you and I, we do this daily. Probably we go, oh shoot, look, what would have happened, millions of years ago if some microbial bacteria didn't get engulfed, in some eukaryote something to form mitochondrial matrix and mitochondrial systems and ATP synthase. You would never have the complexity of animals you have now, right? Because we have a lot more ATP production. So that allowed for complexity. That was a fortunate accident, right? But if that never happened, if we never had that event happen, that it only takes once, and then that just propagated through, the population through selective pressures and basically, evolution. Well, that was pretty fortunate, right? I mean, has that happened on other planets? Is there complex life on other planets? I mean, I would assume. Now, this is my personal view, Elmo. I would assume that because chemistry and physics would work throughout the universe. I think the laws of things are standard. I don't think there's, some part of the universe where they differ that much, if at all, right? And so if DNA can exist here, then it can exist somewhere else. So life should be ubiquitous throughout the earth, given the right conditions.
Do you mean the universe?
Yeah, the universe. Yeah, sorry. Throughout the universe, given the right conditions. And through natural selection and evolutionary processes, something eventually will become complex, because the mitochondrial thing didn't just happen in animals; it happened in plants too, right? Chloroplast, and there was the same kind of thing that happened in plants that allowed for plants to be complex. So we know these things could happen. We should be seeing life everywhere, but we don't. Yeah, and so it really makes you think, what is it about us? Now, I subscribe to the weak anthropic principle that, we can apprehend the universe, and that's great. But why are we able to apprehend the universe?
Are you saying that aliens are hiding from us, man?
Well, first of all, if you're an alien, do you want to come here?
Nope.
Right, exactly. So, if aliens exist, they probably have no idea we're here, just like we have no idea they're there, unless they have advanced space travel. But I'm going to go on a limb and say this, not a hill I'm willing to die on, but if we are the only life in the entire universe, that begs, well, I shouldn't say begs the question, it raises the question, why? That is a pretty huge question. Why? Right? I mean, to me, that question would just, look, if somebody says, hey, look, God or some kind of matrix thing, like some kind of what do they
simulation.
Call it? Simulation theory. At that point, it sounds pretty good. So I'll go on a limb for that. If I could actually for a fact that we are the only life in the universe, man. I mean, wow, that's important.
But for now, what do you think?
For now, I just do what I can to talk to people about these things. I don't have a big dog in the fight on whether God exists or not. I am a little bit apathetic toward that, because I find that those discussions really go nowhere. They've been trying to decide that for thousands of years, and it's not going to be resolved in some kind of hangout with a couple people talking about these things. It's not going to be resolved. So I'm not really interested in that. I discuss more of the things that are more objective, I think, in most cases. Like, for example, I do mathematics, right? A little bit, nothing great, but there are people that deny mathematics. I mean, well, those are objective things that you can have a discussion on and say, look, you're just wrong on this, because here's the mathematics, here's the proof, literally a proof, right? A mathematical proof, and then try to figure out why they have some conceptual error, because they're wrong. Like, for example, if you tell me A does not equal A, I'm going to look at you like you're a little bit off your mark. Right? A little bit, not quite there, because of course that has to be true. That's a metaphysical necessity. It cannot fail to be true in any possible world. It is objectively true, no matter what the case. If somebody subjectively says, no, I don't believe it. Well, who cares? You don't believe it. You can believe it's false, right? You can claim it's false. You're still wrong. A equals A, law of identity. There's no way that could possibly be false, right? So I like to have those discussions where I can show somebody, look, they're just objectively wrong. Now, that's not always the case. We talk about a lot of things there's just maybe no right or wrong answer to. But I'm not really interested whether God exists or not. I'm more interested, want to know why they believe certain things.
Well, one last question then, bro, because so if all this, then you just want to keep discussing on it. But then I think you should have an answer to this question, which is that how should we live as human beings here on Earth? Like, how should we act? What should be the goal here? The direction.
That goes back to the virtue thing, right, man? Be kind to people. Be honest with people. I've had people in my life that were very dishonest. As you know, I've been involved in a very prolonged 2-year-long lawsuit over somebody who was dishonest, stole my YouTube channel, stole $60,000, lied under oath, submitted false evidence to the court, submitted false bank records, perjured themselves, committed forgery, the whole 9 yards. That harms other people, right? It not just harms me, but it harms my daughter. It harms the fans of the show. And so if people just have some empathy and respect for other people, it would go a long way, because I find a lot of these times when you see people that do very dishonest things and very questionable behaviors, they lack empathy. They are probably either borderline sociopaths, full-on sociopaths, perhaps even psychopaths, but they lack the empathetic nature that somebody who has virtue ethics or that wants to be ethical has, because they will take advantage of those kind of people, like I was taken advantage of, right? I trusted somebody that I shouldn't have trusted. Mea culpa, right? So my advice to people is don't be an asshole. I mean, unless there's reason to do. I mean, I'm an asshole to a lot of people, but I think there's reasons to be, but I don't screw them over. I don't lie to them. I don't tell them misinformation. I don't go out of my way to harm them. But like for flat earthers, yeah, people, I'm a little bit harsh on them, right? And people say, well, you're an asshole to a flat earther. Okay, whatever. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go steal their food and they die. So just, have a little charity to people. We have a video, and I'll throw this out there before we end this. Cheshire and I do a show every Monday. We're going back to 11 a.m. Pacific, called Caffeine Corner. And we talk about critical thinking, and we talk about these things and how to interact with people. And one of the shows we did was basically called the 5 C's. And it deals with things like clarity, asking for clarification if you don't understand your interlocutor, context, right? What's the context of what was being said? Principle of charity, be charitable in what they're telling you and steelman the position, these kind of things. And if people abide by these rules, we'd have much better conversations out there. We'd have dialogues like this more often than the vitriolic stuff we see when we watch, some cable access channel out of Austin, where all they do is have some theist call up. The theist gives them, an argument, and they say you're wrong and hang up on him. That's not productive to me.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time, man, and hope you can come back on the show sometime. And yeah, you're an awesome guest, bro. Thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate it, man. And I'm telling you straight out, I've been interviewed by a lot of people. You legit asked some of the best questions I've had.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
University of Maryland Global Campus has more than 20 years' experience providing affordable online education to military service members and working adults. Offering low tuition, no-cost digital resources replacing most textbooks, scholarships for those who qualify, and more. Learn more at umgc.edu/podcast.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.